Marcus Chen had no idea that sharing his peanut butter sandwich would unlock a fortune beyond his wildest dreams. The 12-year-old boy sat in the principal's office, his hands trembling as he stared at the man across from him. The same homeless stranger he'd given his lunch to just yesterday. But now, the man wore an expensive suit, his eyes gleaming with something that made Marcus's heart race. "Do you remember me, son?" the man asked, his voice carrying the weight of secrets that would change everything. Marcus nodded slowly, unable to speak as the principal smiled knowingly. What happened next would transform not just Marcus's life, but his mother's fight for survival in ways no one could have predicted. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button for more real, emotional, life-changing stories like this, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Elementary School's playground as Marcus Chen adjusted his worn backpack straps and hurried toward the main entrance. His sneakers, once white but now a mottled gray from months of wear, squeaked against the wet pavement left behind by the previous night's rain. The 11-year-old boy moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned early that rushing often led to accidents he couldn't afford, both literally and figuratively. Inside his backpack, wrapped in a piece of aluminum foil that his mother had meticulously cleaned and reused countless times, sat his lunch for the day. A peanut butter sandwich made with store-brand ingredients, an apple that had seen better days but was still edible, and a small thermos filled with water instead of the juice boxes his classmates often carried. It wasn't much, but it was made with love, and Marcus had learned to appreciate that distinction in ways that many of his peers had not yet discovered. The school hallways buzzed with the familiar energy of children reconnecting after another night apart. Conversations flowed in multiple languages, reflecting the diverse community that Riverside Elementary served. Marcus caught fragments of Spanish, Vietnamese, and Arabic as he made his way to his locker, a reminder of the melting pot environment that had shaped his young worldview. He understood more languages than he could speak fluently, having absorbed pieces of different cultures through friendships formed over shared struggles and common dreams. His homeroom teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, greeted him with the warm smile that had become a constant source of comfort during his most challenging days. She'd been teaching for nearly 3 decades and possessed an intuitive understanding of which students carried heavier burdens than others. Marcus fell squarely into that category, though he rarely complained or drew attention to his circumstances. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying genuine warmth. "How's your mother feeling today?" The question was asked quietly, away from the ears of other students who were still filtering into the classroom. Mrs. Rodriguez had learned about Isabella Chen's condition several months earlier, when Marcus had struggled to complete a major project due to increased responsibilities at home. Since then, she had become a subtle but consistent source of support, never overstepping boundaries, but always maintaining awareness of the family's situation. "She's having a good day," Marcus replied, though the slight hesitation in his voice suggested that good days had become increasingly rare. "The new medication seems to be helping with the pain, but it makes her really tired." Isabella Chen's battle with lupus had been ongoing for nearly 2 years, transforming their small family's dynamic in ways that neither she nor Marcus had been prepared for. What had begun as joint pain and fatigue had evolved into a complex medical condition that required constant monitoring, expensive medications, and frequent doctor visits that strained both their finances and their emotional reserves. The morning passed with the familiar rhythm of elementary school education. Mathematics worksheets, filled with word problems about buying groceries and calculating change, problems that Marcus solved with the practical knowledge of someone who actually managed such transactions in real life. Social studies lessons about community helpers that resonated deeply with a boy who had witnessed firsthand the impact of teachers, nurses, and social workers. Language arts exercises and creative writing that provided an outlet for emotions and experiences that were often too complex for casual conversation. During recess, Marcus typically spent his time reading in the library rather than participating in the more physically demanding playground activities. It wasn't that he disliked sports or outdoor games, but he had learned to conserve his energy for the responsibilities that awaited him after school. While other children could go home to snacks and television, Marcus would return to an apartment where he often served as caregiver, helper, and emotional support for his mother on her more difficult days. The library had become his sanctuary, a place where he could travel to different worlds through books, while simultaneously staying close enough to his teachers to seek help when needed. The librarian, Mr. Patterson, had noticed Marcus's consistent presence and had begun recommending books that he thought might appeal to a young man who seemed to carry wisdom beyond his years. "Have you considered this one?" Mr. Patterson asked, sliding a copy of Bridge to Terabithia across the circulation desk. "It's about friendship and imagination, but it also deals with some deeper themes that I think you might appreciate." Marcus accepted the book gratefully, running his fingers over the cover illustration. Reading had become more than entertainment for him. It served as both escape and education, providing perspectives on how other people navigated challenges and found strength in difficult circumstances. The lunch bell rang with its familiar electronic chime, and students began their migration toward the cafeteria. Marcus joined the flow of children moving through the hallways, but his destination differed from most of his classmates. While they headed toward the serving lines where hot meals awaited purchase, Marcus found a quiet table near the windows where he could eat his homemade lunch while observing the world outside. The cafeteria operated on a system that had become all too familiar to Marcus over his years at Riverside Elementary. Students with sufficient funds could purchase complete meals that included entrees, sides, fruits, vegetables, and beverages. Those qualifying for reduced-price meals paid a smaller amount for similar offerings. Students like Marcus, whose families fell into specific income brackets, received free meals through federal assistance programs. However, Marcus had recently begun declining the free lunch option, not out of pride or embarrassment, but out of practical consideration for his family's circumstances. The meals provided at school, while nutritionally adequate, often contained ingredients that didn't agree with his mother's restricted diet. By bringing lunch from home, he could ensure that they purchased ingredients in quantities that would serve both of their needs, maximizing their limited grocery budget while maintaining consistency in their meal planning. He unwrapped his sandwich carefully, smoothing out the aluminum foil so that it could be reused later. The peanut butter had been spread thin to make the jar last longer, but his mother had added sliced banana to provide additional nutrition and flavor. It was a small touch that demonstrated the love and creativity that could exist even within financial constraints. As Marcus ate, he watched through the large windows that provided a view of Maple Street Park, a small green space directly across from the school. The park served as an unofficial community gathering place, hosting everything from pickup basketball games to impromptu family picnics. During school hours, it typically remained quiet, except for the occasional dog walker or jogger passing through. Today, however, Marcus noticed a figure sitting alone on one of the weathered wooden benches. The man appeared to be elderly, though it was difficult to determine his exact age from a distance. His clothing suggested someone who had been sleeping outdoors. Layers of mismatched garments that prioritized warmth and durability over appearance. A worn baseball cap covered most of his hair, and his posture conveyed the particular type of exhaustion that comes from uncertainty about where the next meal or safe place to sleep might come from. Marcus had encountered homeless individuals before, during trips to various parts of the city with his mother for medical appointments. Isabella had always taught him to treat such encounters with compassion rather than fear, explaining that circumstances beyond people's control could lead to situations that were temporary but challenging. She had shared stories from her own childhood, when her family had experienced housing instability, helping Marcus understand that dignity and worth weren't determined by material possessions or living situations. The man in the park sat motionless for several minutes, occasionally reaching into a plastic bag beside him to retrieve what appeared to be personal belongings. He would examine each item briefly before returning it to the bag, a ritual that suggested both careful inventory management and the restless energy of someone with limited options for occupying time. Marcus finished half of his sandwich and paused, considering the apple that remained in his lunch container. His mother had packed exactly what she knew he would need to feel satisfied until dinner, but today something felt different. The man across the street hadn't moved from the bench, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he might be hungry. The internal debate that followed reflected the complexity of Marcus's young but already well-developed moral compass. He knew that his own family's resources were limited, and that the food he carried represented careful planning and budgeting on his mother's part. At the same time, he had been raised with values that emphasized sharing and community support, principles that his mother had maintained even during their most difficult periods. He remembered a conversation from several weeks earlier, when Isabella had explained why she always kept a few dollars in her purse, specifically for people who asked for help on the street. "We might not have much," she had said, "but we always have enough to share something with someone who has less. That's how communities survive, and how we remember our humanity." The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. Marcus carefully rewrapped the remaining half of his sandwich, placed it back in his container along with the apple and thermos, and stood up from his table. Several of his classmates were engaged in animated conversations nearby, but none paid attention as he walked toward the cafeteria exit. The route from the school building to Maple Street Park required crossing a single intersection, an action that Marcus had performed countless times while walking to and from school. However, leaving school grounds during lunch period without explicit permission represented a violation of established rules, a fact that Marcus acknowledged but chose to prioritize below his immediate moral bow. Imperative. The crosswalk signal provided the green light he needed, and Marcus hurried across the street with his lunch container held securely against his chest. The park felt different when approached from this direction, larger and more open than it appeared from the cafeteria windows. The grass showed signs of recent maintenance, with neat lines from a lawnmower visible across the central area. The man on the bench looked up as Marcus approached, his expression shifting from blank resignation to mild curiosity. Up close, Marcus could see that the stranger was probably younger than he had initially appeared, perhaps in his 50s or early 60s. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had spent considerable time outdoors, but his eyes held intelligence and awareness that contradicted any assumptions about his circumstances. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said, his voice carrying the polite formality that Isabella had drilled into him through years of practice. "I noticed you sitting here, and I was wondering if you might be hungry." The man studied Marcus for several seconds before responding. His voice, when it came, was deeper than Marcus had expected, with a slight rasp that suggested either illness or long periods without regular conversation. "That's very kind of you to ask, young man. Why do you want to know?" Marcus lifted his lunch container slightly, indicating its contents without making assumptions about the man's situation or needs. "I have my lunch here, and there's more than I can eat. My mom always says that sharing is richer than money, and I thought maybe you'd like to have some of it." The statement hung in the air between them, carrying weight that neither participant fully understood at the moment. For Marcus, it represented the practical application of values that had been instilled through both direct teaching and observed example. For the man, whose name was David Wellington, it represented something far more complex and emotionally significant. David Wellington had spent the previous 3 weeks living deliberately among the homeless population of the city. Not out of necessity, but as part of a personal journey that had grown out of his increasing disconnection from the human cost of business decisions made from boardroom tables. As the founder and primary shareholder of Wellington Industries, a diversified corporation with interests in technology, real estate, and financial services, David controlled assets worth several $billion. However, recent events in his personal life had prompted a period of reflection about purpose, legacy, and the distance that wealth could create between individuals and the communities they claimed to serve. The death of his wife, Margaret, 6 months earlier, had shattered David's carefully constructed world of schedules, obligations, and strategic planning. Margaret had been not only his partner in marriage, but also his moral compass in business, consistently advocating for corporate policies that prioritized community benefit alongside profit maximization. Her absence had left him questioning not only his personal direction, but also the broader impact of his company's operations on the lives of ordinary families. Margaret's final months had been spent in hospitals and care facilities, surrounded by medical professionals who worked tirelessly to provide comfort and dignity during her battle with cancer. David had watched these individuals, many of whom were clearly struggling financially themselves, pour their hearts into caring for someone they barely knew. The contrast between their selfless dedication and his own previous detachment from such human realities had created a cognitive dissonance that demanded resolution. His decision to live temporarily without the trappings of wealth had been motivated by a desire to understand what life felt like for people who couldn't insulate themselves from uncertainty, discomfort, and dependence on others' kindness. The experiment had provided insights that no amount of market research or demographic data could have delivered. He had experienced the particular vulnerability of not knowing where he would sleep each night, the way hunger became a constant background presence when meals weren't guaranteed, and the complex mix of gratitude and humiliation that accompanied accepting help from strangers. Now, faced with this articulate, compassionate child who was offering to share his lunch based on principles that seemed to come from deep conviction rather than superficial politeness, David felt something stir that had been dormant for months. This boy, who clearly came from circumstances that were far from privileged, was demonstrating the kind of automatic generosity that David's wealth had somehow trained out of him over the years. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," David said, accepting the lunch container that Marcus held out to him. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus Chen," the boy replied, settling onto the bench beside David with the easy familiarity of someone accustomed to making friends across social boundaries. "I'm in 6th grade at Riverside Elementary, right across the street." David opened the container and examined its contents with genuine appreciation. The sandwich had been prepared with obvious care. The apple was fresh despite its slightly imperfect appearance, and the thermos was clean and well-maintained. These details spoke to a family that took pride in their circumstances, regardless of their limitations, a quality that David had observed in various forms during his weeks of voluntary homelessness. "This is very generous, Marcus. Are you sure you have enough for yourself?" Marcus nodded confidently. "My mom always packs a little extra because she says you never know when someone might need help. She used to work in a restaurant before she got sick, so she knows how important food is to people." The casual mention of his mother's illness provided David with additional context about Marcus's family situation, information that he filed away while maintaining appropriate boundaries in their conversation. He had learned during his recent experiences that people living with economic uncertainty often dealt simultaneously with multiple challenges, including health issues that could be both cause and consequence of financial strain. They ate together in comfortable silence for several minutes, sharing the sandwich and apple while watching the normal rhythms of the neighborhood around them. A few cars passed on Maple Street, their occupants likely unaware of the unusual nature of the interaction taking place on the park bench. A dog walker with a golden retriever nodded politely as she passed, treating David and Marcus as simply two people enjoying lunch outdoors. "Tell me about your mother," David said eventually, his tone suggesting genuine interest rather than mere politeness. Marcus's face brightened with the particular joy that children display when given opportunities to talk about beloved family members. "Her name is Isabella, and she's the smartest person I know. She came here from the Philippines when she was about my age, and she learned English by watching TV and reading library books. She worked really hard to become a chef, but then she got lupus, which is this disease that makes her immune system attack her own body." The explanation was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had learned to discuss complex medical concepts as part of regular conversation. David recognized the particular type of maturity that developed in children who were forced to understand adult problems earlier than their peers, a recognition that came with both admiration and sadness. "That must be difficult for both of you," David observed, careful not to make assumptions about their specific circumstances, while acknowledging the emotional reality that Marcus had shared. "Some days are harder than others," Marcus admitted. "But Mom always says that challenges make people stronger if they face them together. She still cooks when she's feeling good, and she teaches me recipes so I can help when she needs to rest. I'm getting pretty good at making rice and stir-frying vegetables." The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes, covering topics that ranged from Marcus's favorite subjects in school to his dreams for the future. David learned that the boy excelled in mathematics and science, enjoyed reading both fiction and nonfiction, and had developed a particular interest in learning about different cultures through food and cooking. Marcus, in turn, learned that David had traveled extensively, appreciated good food, and had once dreamed of being a teacher before, Other opportunities came up. As the lunch period drew to a close, Marcus began gathering the empty container and thermos, preparing to return to school for his afternoon classes. David watched this process with growing internal conflict, torn between his desire to maintain the anonymity of his current experiment and his growing conviction that this particular family deserved more direct support than anonymous charitable giving could provide. "Marcus," he said as the boy stood to leave, "thank you for sharing your lunch with me. More importantly, thank you for treating me like a person worth knowing. That means more than you might realize." Marcus smiled with the uncomplicated warmth that came naturally to him. "My mom says everyone has a story worth hearing if you take time to listen. Maybe I'll see you here again sometime." As Marcus crossed back toward the school, David remained on the bench, processing the emotions and decisions that their encounter had triggered. In less than an hour, this 11-year-old boy had demonstrated more authentic generosity and human connection than David had experienced in months of high-level business meetings and social obligations. That evening, David made his way to a different shelter than the one where he had been staying, driven by a need for privacy while he made several important phone calls. Using a prepaid cell phone that he had purchased at the beginning of his homeless experience, he contacted his personal assistant, his head of security, and his chief financial officer, setting in motion a series of inquiries that would provide him with comprehensive information about the Chen family's circumstances. Within 48 hours, David had learned that Isabella Chen was indeed battling lupus, a condition that had forced her to leave her position as a sous chef at a downtown restaurant. Her medical expenses, even with insurance coverage, had consumed most of the family's savings. Marcus maintained excellent grades despite taking on increased responsibilities at home, and both mother and son were well regarded by teachers, neighbors, and community members who knew them. More importantly, David's investigation revealed that the family had never sought public attention for their struggles, never launched crowdfunding campaigns, and had consistently declined offers of charity that they perceived as handouts rather than genuine community support. Their approach to their challenges reflected the same dignity and integrity that Marcus had demonstrated during their park bench conversation. The plan that began forming in David's mind was unlike anything he had considered during his decades as a business leader. Rather than simply providing financial assistance, which his research suggested the family might be reluctant to accept from a stranger, he wanted to create an opportunity that honored their values while addressing their needs. The vehicle for this assistance would be Riverside Elementary School, an institution that his company had supported anonymously for several years through educational grants and facility improvements. Wellington Industries had established a foundation several years earlier that focused on educational opportunities for children from low-income families. The foundation operated with minimal publicity, preferring to let its actions speak rather than seeking recognition for its charitable activities. David had always maintained personal distance from the foundation's beneficiaries, viewing his role as providing resources rather than direct involvement. However, Marcus's simple act of kindness had changed David's perspective on the relationship between giving and receiving. The boy had offered his lunch, not as charity, but as human connection, creating a moment of genuine community rather than a transaction between benefactor and recipient. David wanted to respond in kind, providing assistance that felt like recognition of worth rather than pity for circumstances. 3 days after their initial meeting, David returned to Maple Street Park, but this time he was clean-shaven, wearing clothes that had been laundered, and carrying himself with the confidence that came from having slept in a proper bed. He maintained his position on the same bench where he and Marcus had shared lunch, hoping that the boy's routine might bring him back to the area. His patience was rewarded when Marcus appeared at the cafeteria windows during the lunch period, scanning the park with obvious interest. David waved discreetly, and Marcus's face lit up with recognition. Within minutes, the boy had crossed the street again, carrying another carefully packed lunch. "I was hoping I'd see you again," Marcus said, settling onto the bench with obvious pleasure. "How have you been?" David smiled, noting how the question was asked with genuine concern rather than polite formality. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day. You really made an impression on me, Marcus." They shared Marcus's lunch again, but this time David was more forthcoming about his own background, carefully revealing information that would help Marcus understand what was about to happen without overwhelming him with the full scope of David's wealth and influence. "I want to tell you something, Marcus, but I need you to promise me that you'll listen to the whole story before you react, okay?" Marcus nodded, his expression showing the seriousness with which he approached important conversations. "I haven't been completely honest with you about who I am," David began. "I do travel a lot, and I have had many different experiences. But I'm not actually homeless. I've been living that way by choice for the past few weeks, because I wanted to understand what life was like for people who don't have the advantages I've had." Marcus listened intently, his young mind processing the implications of what David was telling him. Rather than feeling deceived, he seemed intrigued by the complexity of David's motivations. "Why did you want to do that?" Marcus asked. David appreciated the straightforward nature of the question, which focused on understanding rather than judgment. "My wife died 6 months ago, and it made me realize that I had become disconnected from the things that really matter in life. I wanted to remember what it felt like to depend on other people's kindness. The way you showed me kindness without knowing anything about me." The explanation seemed to satisfy Marcus's curiosity, while preparing him for what David planned to reveal next. "The reason I'm telling you this is because I want to do something for you and your mother, but I want to do it in a way that feels right to both of you. Would you be willing to bring your mother to meet me tomorrow? I'd like to talk to both of you about some opportunities that might be helpful." Marcus considered this request carefully, displaying the cautious wisdom that came from his family's experiences with well-meaning but sometimes inappropriate offers of assistance. "What kind of opportunities?" he asked. David had anticipated this question and had prepared an answer that would be both honest and appropriate for Marcus's age and understanding. "I work with a foundation that helps families pay for education and medical expenses when they're facing challenges like the ones you and your mother are dealing with. But we don't just give people money and walk away. We try to create partnerships that help families build stronger futures for themselves." End quote. The distinction between charity and partnership was one that David had learned to appreciate during his recent experiences. People in difficult circumstances often possessed skills, knowledge, and determination that could be leveraged into sustainable solutions if they were provided with appropriate support and opportunities. Marcus spent the remainder of his lunch period asking thoughtful questions about the foundation, David's role in it, and what kind of partnership might be possible for his family. David answered each question honestly, while being careful not to overwhelm the boy with information that would be more appropriately shared with his mother present. When Marcus returned to school that afternoon, he carried with him a business card, but identified David as the Director of Community Outreach for the Wellington Foundation, along with a phone number that Isabella could call to arrange a meeting. David had chosen this title carefully, as it accurately described the role he intended to play, while avoiding the complications that might arise from revealing his position as the Foundation's primary benefactor. That evening, Marcus shared the day's events with his mother during dinner, a meal that they had prepared together using ingredients that showcased Isabella's culinary creativity within their budgetary constraints. Rice formed the foundation of the meal, supplemented with vegetables that had been purchased during a manager's special sale, and seasoned with spices that Isabella had learned to combine in ways that created complex flavors from simple ingredients. Isabella listened to her son's account with the mixture of interest and caution that had become her default response to unexpected developments in their lives. Her experience with lupus had taught her that hope needed to be balanced with realistic expectations, and that offers of assistance sometimes came with strings attached that weren't immediately apparent. "What was your impression of this man?" she asked Marcus, focusing on her son's observational skills and intuitive judgment rather than the specific details of David's proposal. Marcus considered the question seriously, understanding that his mother was asking him to evaluate not just what David had said, but also what he had observed about David's character and motivations. "I think he's been sad about something, but he's trying to figure out how to make things better," Marcus said eventually. "He listened to me like what I was saying actually mattered. And he didn't talk down to me or make me feel like I was just a kid. When I shared my lunch with him the first time, he seemed surprised that someone would do that, like maybe people haven't been very kind to him recently." Isabella nodded, recognizing the emotional intelligence that her son had developed through their shared experiences with loss, illness, and community support. Marcus had learned to read people's underlying emotional states, a skill that served him well in navigating social situations, but also carried the burden of awareness that sometimes exceeded his years. After dinner, while Marcus completed his homework at the kitchen table, Isabella made the phone call to the number on David's business card. The conversation that followed lasted nearly an hour and covered topics ranging from the Foundation's history and mission to Isabella's medical situation and career background. David's questions were respectful and relevant, focusing on understanding the family's goals and preferences rather than making assumptions about their needs. By the end of the conversation, Isabella had agreed to meet with David the following afternoon, with the understanding that any assistance offered would be structured as a collaborative partnership rather than a one-sided charitable donation. David had explained that the Foundation's most successful interventions occurred when recipients were actively involved in designing and implementing solutions that addressed their specific circumstances and priorities. The meeting took place at a coffee shop near Riverside Elementary, chosen because it was familiar to Isabella and Marcus, while being public enough to ensure comfortable boundaries for their initial face-to-face conversation. David arrived early and selected a table that would allow privacy for their discussion, while remaining visible to other patrons, another small gesture designed to demonstrate respect for the family's comfort and safety. Isabella appeared precisely on time, accompanied by Marcus, who had been granted permission to leave school early for what his teacher understood to be an important family meeting. David's first impression was of a woman who carried herself with dignity, despite obvious fatigue, whose careful attention to her appearance reflected self-respect rather than vanity, and whose protective instincts regarding her son were both subtle and unmistakable. The conversation began with David providing more detailed information about the Wellington Foundation's history and approach to family partnerships. He explained that the foundation had been established to address the gap between traditional charity, which often created dependency, and purely commercial relationships, which ignored the human elements of economic challenges. Our goal is to help families achieve stability and independence by addressing both immediate needs and long-term opportunities, David explained. In your case, that might involve assistance with medical expenses, educational support for Marcus, and potentially career development opportunities that work within the constraints of your health condition. Isabella listened carefully, asking questions that demonstrated both her intelligence and her experience with navigating bureaucratic systems. She wanted to understand not only what assistance might be available, but also what obligations or expectations would accompany such assistance. "What would you need from us in return?" she asked, addressing the question that David had been anticipating throughout their conversation. "Primarily, we'd want you to be active partners in designing solutions that work for your family's specific situation," David replied. "We've learned that the most successful partnerships occur when families maintain control over their own decisions while having access to resources that expand their options." The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, covering practical details about medical insurance supplements, educational scholarships, and potential opportunities for Isabella to use her culinary skills in ways that accommodated her health limitations. David had come prepared with specific proposals that reflected the research his team had conducted, but he presented these as starting points for negotiation rather than fixed offers. By the end of the meeting, Isabella had agreed to a partnership arrangement that would provide immediate assistance with her medical expenses, while creating longer-term opportunities for both her and Marcus's educational and career development. The foundation would supplement their health insurance to ensure that Isabella could access the most effective treatments available, while also providing Marcus with educational support that would prepare him for advanced academic opportunities. Additionally, David had proposed a consulting arrangement that would allow Isabella to work with the Foundation's community outreach programs, using her cultural background and culinary expertise to develop nutrition education programs for other families facing similar challenges. This component of the partnership addressed Isabella's desire to contribute meaningfully rather than simply receiving assistance. 3 weeks after the partnership agreement was finalized, Marcus found himself sitting in the principal's office at Riverside Elementary. But this time, the circumstances were entirely different from the disciplinary visits that most students associated with such summons. Principal Harrison had called Marcus out of his mathematics class with a smile and the simple statement that someone special wanted to meet with him. The principal's office had been transformed for the occasion, with additional chairs arranged to accommodate what Marcus soon realized was a gathering rather than a typical administrative meeting. Mrs. Rodriguez was present, along with Mr. Resch Patterson from the library, and several other teachers who had worked with Marcus throughout his time at the school. At the center of the arrangement sat David Wellington, but this time he was dressed in a way that reflected his actual position in the business world. The expensive suit, confident posture, and overall presentation created a sharp contrast with the humble appearance he had maintained during their park bench encounters. "Hello, Marcus," David said, rising from his chair as the boy entered the office. "I think it's time I told you the complete truth about who I am and why your kindness in the park meant so much to me." Marcus took the seat that Principal Harrison indicated, his young mind working to process the disconnect between the David he had known and the David who stood before him now. However, rather than feeling deceived or confused, Marcus found himself curious about the story that was about to unfold. David began by explaining his actual role as the founder and primary benefactor of Wellington Industries, providing context that helped Marcus understand the resources that were available through their partnership, while also explaining why he had chosen to live anonymously among the homeless population. "When my wife died," David continued, "I realized that I had become isolated from the kind of human connections that make life meaningful. I had spent so many years focused on business success that I had forgotten what it felt like to interact with people who valued kindness over profit, generosity over accumulation." The explanation resonated with Marcus, who had observed enough adult behavior to recognize the difference between people who prioritized relationships and those who seemed driven by other motivations. "Your decision to share your lunch with me wasn't just about food," David said. "It was about seeing me as a person worth caring about, regardless of my circumstances. That reminded me of something important that I had lost sight of." Principal Harrison then explained that the Wellington Foundation had been supporting Riverside Elementary anonymously for several years, funding programs and facility improvements that had benefited Marcus and his classmates without their knowledge. David's decision to reveal his identity was motivated by his desire to create a more personal connection with the school community, starting with the student who had reminded him why such connections mattered. The meeting concluded with the announcement that Marcus had been selected for a comprehensive educational scholarship that would cover not only his remaining elementary school years, but also his transition to middle buck school, high school, and eventually college. The scholarship was designed to provide support without pressure, allowing Marcus to pursue his interests and talents while ensuring that financial constraints would never limit his educational opportunities. More importantly, from Marcus's perspective, the partnership would provide his mother with the medical support and career opportunities that would allow their family to achieve the stability and independence that had been their goal throughout their struggles with Isabella's illness. As the meeting concluded and Marcus prepared to return to his mathematics class, David asked for a moment of private conversation. The principal's office emptied except for the two of them, creating an intimate space for the conversation that had been building since their first encounter in the park. "I want you to understand something, Marcus," David said, his voice carrying the sincerity that had characterized their park bench conversations. "This partnership isn't about me helping your family because I'm wealthy, and you're not. It's about recognizing that you and your mother have qualities that the world needs more of, and ensuring that circumstances don't prevent you from sharing those qualities with others." End quote. Marcus nodded, understanding intuitively the distinction that David was making between charity and recognition of worth. What you get in the park, sharing your lunch with someone you thought was hungry, that's the kind of action that changes the world, David continued. "Not because it solved my problems, but because it demonstrated that generosity and compassion can exist regardless of circumstances. I want to make sure you have the opportunity to keep making that kind of difference in people's lives." And the conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the office door, followed by Isabella's entrance. She had been invited to join the meeting's conclusion, providing an opportunity for the entire family to understand the partnership arrangement and its implications for their future. Isabella's response to the revelations about David's identity was characteristically thoughtful and dignified. She expressed gratitude for the opportunities being offered while maintaining the sense of personal agency that had carried her through her most difficult challenges. "This is overwhelming," she admitted. "But I want you to know that we don't take this lightly. Marcus and I have talked about how to accept help in ways that honor both the giver and the receiver, and I believe this partnership reflects those values." David smiled, recognizing in Isabella the same authentic dignity that Marcus had demonstrated during their initial encounter. The family's response to unexpected good fortune was revealing as much about their character as their response to adversity had been. 6 months later, Marcus Chen stood at the podium in Riverside Elementary's auditorium, delivering a speech to an audience that included his classmates, teachers, family members, and several representatives from the Wellington Foundation. The occasion was the school's annual academic awards ceremony, but Marcus's speech wasn't about his own achievements. Instead, he spoke about the lessons he had learned about community, generosity, and the ways that small actions could create significant changes in people's lives. His words reflected not only his experience with David in the park, but also his observations about how their family's partnership with the foundation had created opportunities for other families facing similar challenges. Isabella sat in the front row, her health stabilized by access to better medical care, and her spirits lifted by the consulting work that allowed her to use her skills in service of others. The nutrition education programs she had developed were being implemented in schools throughout the district, helping other families learn to create healthy, affordable meals while celebrating the cultural diversity that made their community strong. David Wellington sat several rows behind Isabella, maintaining the low profile that he preferred while witnessing the long-term impact of the partnership that had begun with a shared peanut butter sandwich. As he listened to Marcus speak about the importance of treating every person with dignity and kindness, David reflected on how much his own life had changed since that day in the park. The business decisions that once seemed so important now carried different weight, filtered through his renewed understanding of how corporate choices affected real families like the Chens. Wellington Industries had quietly restructured several of its community investment programs, prioritizing long-term partnerships over short-term charitable donations, an approach that had proven both more effective and more fulfilling for everyone involved. Marcus's speech concluded with words that would stay with David for years to come. "My mom always taught me that sharing is richer than money. But I've learned that sharing isn't just about giving away what you have. It's about recognizing that we all have something valuable to offer, whether it's a sandwich, a BA, skill, or simply the willingness to see other people as worthy of our attention and care." The applause that followed was enthusiastic but respectful, reflecting the audience's appreciation for wisdom that seemed remarkable coming from someone so young. As Marcus returned to his seat among his classmates, David caught Isabella's eye and nodded slightly, a gesture of mutual recognition between two people who understood that they had been changed by the experience of genuine partnership. After the ceremony, as families gathered in the school's multi-purpose room for refreshments and informal conversation, David approached the Chen family with the careful respect that had characterized all of their interactions. Marcus greeted him with the easy warmth that had never diminished despite learning about David's wealth and influence. "Mr. Wellington," Marcus said, "I'm glad you could be here today. Mom made some of those spring rolls you liked when you visited our apartment last month." The mention of David's visit to their home reflected the evolution of their relationship, from formal partnership to genuine friendship. David had been invited to share dinner with the Chen family on several occasions, experiences that had provided him with insights into their values, traditions, and dreams that no amount of paperwork or official reporting could have delivered. Isabella approached with a plate of the spring rolls Marcus had mentioned, along with a small container of the dipping sauce that had become David's favorite among her many culinary creations. "These are made with vegetables from the community garden that Marcus helped plant," she explained, referring to one of the foundation's newer initiatives that combine nutrition education with hands-on learning opportunities for students and families. The Community Garden Project had grown out of Isabella's consulting work with the foundation, developing into a neighborhood resource that provided fresh produce for families while creating opportunities for intergenerational learning and cultural exchange. Marcus had become one of the garden's most enthusiastic participants, applying the scientific method he was learning in school to experiments with different growing techniques and plant varieties. As David accepted the spring rolls, he marveled at how the simple act of sharing food continued to be a central element in his relationship with the Chen family. Every meal they had shared, from that first peanut butter sandwich in the park to elaborate dinners in their apartment, had deepened his understanding of how nourishment involved much more than just calories and nutrients. "How are things going with the high school preparation program?" David asked Marcus, referring to the advanced academic track that had been designed to challenge him intellectually, while providing support for the transition to a more demanding educational environment. Marcus's face lit up with the enthusiasm he always displayed when discussing his studies. "Really well. I'm especially enjoying the engineering design course, where we're learning to solve problems by building and testing different solutions. Last week, we designed water filtration systems using materials that families could afford and assembled themselves." End quote. The project Marcus described reflected the Foundation's commitment to education that connected academic learning with real-world applications. Rather than simply preparing students for standardized tests, the programs emphasized critical thinking, creativity, and social responsibility, qualities that David believed were essential for the next generation of leaders. Isabella had also been thriving in her expanded role with the Foundation. Her nutrition education programs had grown to include cooking classes for parents, school lunch menu consulting, and cultural competency training for healthcare providers working with diverse patient populations. The work allowed her to use her professional skills while accommodating the flexibility she needed to manage her health condition. "I have some news to share with both of you," David said, his tone suggesting something significant. "The Foundation's Board of Directors has approved a proposal that I think you'll find interesting." Marcus and Isabella exchanged glances, both recognizing the particular way David introduced topics that would have major implications for their lives. "We've been invited to present our partnership model at a national conference on innovative approaches to community development," David continued. "The organizers want to hear from families who have experienced this approach firsthand, along with Foundation representatives who can speak to the structural elements that make it successful." The invitation represented recognition that their partnership had achieved something worth replicating in other communities, validation that both the Chen family and David found deeply meaningful. "Would you be interested in traveling to Washington, D.C., to share your experiences with other foundations, community organizations, and government officials who are looking for alternatives to traditional charity models?" David asked. Isabella considered the proposal carefully, weighing the opportunity to influence policy and practice against the practical considerations of travel with her health condition and Marcus's school schedule. "What would we be expected to talk about?" she asked, focusing on the substance of the presentation rather than the prestige of the venue. David had anticipated this question and had prepared an answer that reflected his understanding of Isabella's priorities and communication style. "Primarily, we'd want you to share your perspective on what makes partnerships like ours successful from the recipient's standpoint," he said. "Many Foundation officials and policymakers make decisions about assistance programs without hearing directly from the families who are affected by those decisions. Your insights about maintaining dignity, agency, and cultural identity while receiving support could help reshape how these programs are designed and implemented." End quote. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering practical details about the conference, travel arrangements, and the specific topics that might be most valuable for Marcus and Isabella to address. By the end of their discussion, both family members had agreed to participate, viewing the opportunity as an extension of their partnership's original goal of creating positive change that extended beyond their individual circumstances. 3 months later, Marcus found himself standing at a podium in a Washington, D.C. hotel ballroom, addressing an audience of several hundred Foundation executives, community organizers, and government officials. The setting was intimidating in scale, but Marcus had learned to focus on the content of his message rather than the context of its delivery. "When I first shared my lunch with Mr. Wellington in the park," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system, "I didn't think about whether he deserved help or whether I had enough to spare. I just saw someone who looked hungry, and I had food to share." The audience listened with the particular attention that adults paid to children who demonstrated wisdom beyond their years, But Marcus had learned to speak to such groups as equals, rather than performing the role of a precocious child. What I've learned since then is that the best kind of help doesn't make people feel small or grateful in a way that's uncomfortable. It makes them feel like their own contributions matter, like they're part of solving problems, instead of just receiving solutions from other people." End quote. Isabella sat at a table near the front of the room, watching her son articulate concepts that had taken her years to understand through her own experiences with various assistance programs. Marcus's natural ability to communicate complex ideas in accessible language had been enhanced by his educational opportunities. But his core message reflected values that had been instilled long before the Wellington Foundation became part of their lives. David Wellington sat at the same table, observing the audience's response to Marcus's presentation with professional interest and personal pride. The boy's ability to connect with diverse audiences had become apparent during several smaller speaking engagements over the previous months, but this national conference represented his most significant platform to date. "The partnership we have with the Wellington Foundation works because it's based on respect rather than pity," Marcus continued. "Mr. Wellington didn't offer to help us because he felt sorry for us. He offered to partner with us because he recognized that we had something valuable to contribute, and he wanted to make sure we had the resources to keep contributing." The distinction Marcus was making had become central to the Foundation's evolving approach to community engagement. Rather than identifying deserving recipients for charitable assistance, the Foundation had shifted toward recognizing community assets and providing resources to amplify existing strengths. Marcus's portion of the presentation concluded with a detailed description of the Community Garden Project, which had grown from a single school initiative to a network of neighborhood gardens that served families throughout the district. The project exemplified the kind of sustainable, community-driven development that emerged when partnerships were based on mutual respect and shared goals rather than one-sided charity. Isabella followed Marcus at the podium, speaking about the importance of cultural competency in assistance programs and the ways that well-intentioned help could sometimes undermine the very communities it was designed to serve. Her presentation drew on her experiences not only with the Wellington Foundation, but also with other organizations that had approached their family's situation with less sensitivity and effectiveness. "Dignity isn't something you can give to people," Isabella explained to the audience. "It's something that people already possess, and your role as helpers is to ensure that your assistance doesn't accidentally take that dignity away." Her words resonated particularly strongly with the government officials in the audience, many of whom had struggled to understand why some assistance programs succeeded, while others created dependency or resentment among their intended beneficiaries. David's presentation focused on the structural and philosophical elements that had made the Chen family partnership successful, providing a framework that other organizations could adapt to their own communities and, quote, constituencies. He emphasized the importance of long-term commitment, flexibility in program design, and the need for assistance providers to be willing to learn from the people they claim to serve. The conference presentations generated significant interest from attendees, leading to follow-up conversations, site visits, and consulting opportunities that extended the influence of their partnership model far beyond what any of them had originally envisioned. Marcus, Isabella, and David found themselves serving as informal advisors to foundations and community organizations across the country, sharing their experiences and insights with groups that were committed to more effective and respectful approaches to community development. 1 year after the Washington Conference, Marcus Chen celebrated his 13th birthday with a party that reflected the remarkable journey his family had traveled since that day in Maple Street Park. The celebration took place in the community center that had been built through a collaboration between the Wellington Foundation and several neighborhood organizations, a facility that served as headquarters for the various programs that had grown out of the original partnership. The guest list included Marcus's classmates from his new school, a prestigious private academy where he had been enrolled through his scholarship program, as well as friends from his neighborhood and the diverse community of families who had been touched by the Foundation's expanding network of partnerships. Isabella had prepared a feast that showcased both her Filipino heritage and the multicultural influences she had absorbed through her work with families from various backgrounds. David Wellington arrived early, carrying a gift that he had selected with particular care. rather than something expensive that might feel inappropriate given their relationship's origins. He had chosen a collection of books about social entrepreneurship and community development, topics that reflected Marcus's growing interest in using business principles to address social problems. "I thought you might be interested in reading about other people who have found ways to make money and make a difference at the same time," David explained as Marcus unwrapped the books. Marcus examined each title with genuine interest, recognizing names and organizations that had been mentioned during various foundation meetings and conferences he had attended with his mother and David. "Thank you," Marcus said, his appreciation evident in his tone. "I've been thinking a lot about what I want to study in college, and I keep coming back to the idea of learning how to create businesses that solve problems for communities like ours." The conversation that followed touched on Marcus's academic interests, career aspirations, and the ways that his experiences with the foundation had shaped his understanding of social responsibility and community engagement. David found himself marveling at how naturally Marcus had absorbed complex concepts about economics, social justice, and organizational leadership, integrating these ideas with the values that Isabella had instilled from an early age. As the party continued around them, with children playing games in one area, while adults engaged in conversations about community projects and mutual support, David reflected on the profound changes that had occurred in his own life since accepting that first offered sandwich from Marcus. The partnership with the Chen family had served as a catalyst for broader transformations within Wellington Industries and the Wellington Foundation. The company's community investment strategies had been redesigned to prioritize long-term partnerships over short-term charitable donations. Employee volunteer programs had been restructured to emphasize skill sharing and mutual learning rather than one-way service delivery. Board meetings now included regular presentations from community partners, ensuring that decision-makers maintained direct contact with the people affected by their choices. Most importantly, David had discovered that authentic engagement with diverse communities had enhanced rather than complicated his business operations. Companies that understood their community's needs, strengths, and aspirations were better positioned to create products and services that generated both profit and positive social impact. The Foundation's partnership model had been replicated in dozens of communities across the country, with each adaptation reflecting local priorities and cultural contexts, while maintaining the core principles of mutual respect, long-term commitment, and recognition of community assets. Marcus and Isabella had become sought-after consultants in this expanding network, sharing their experiences and insights with other families and organizations that were committed to more equitable and effective approaches to DATC, community development. As Marcus's birthday celebration continued into the evening, David found himself in conversation with Isabella about the future of their partnership and the ways that their relationship might evolve as Marcus transitioned into high school and began making more independent decisions about his education and career path. "I want to make sure that Marcus feels free to pursue his own interests and goals without feeling obligated to the foundation or to me personally," David said, expressing a concern that had been developing as he witnessed Marcus's growing maturity and independence. Isabella smiled, recognizing the thoughtfulness behind David's worry, while also understanding aspects of her son's character that might not be apparent to someone who hadn't raised him from birth. "Marcus has always been clear about his own values and priorities," she said. "I don't think you need to worry about him feeling trapped by gratitude or obligation. If anything, I think your partnership has given him a clearer sense of what he wants to accomplish with his life." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus himself, who approached carrying a piece of the elaborate cake that Isabella had prepared for the occasion. The cake was decorated with symbols representing various aspects of Marcus's life: books for his love of learning, a globe for his interest in different cultures, gardening tools for his work with the community gardens, and a small bridge representing his role in connecting people from different backgrounds and experiences. "Mr. Wellington," Marcus said, "I wanted to ask you something about the scholarship program." David accepted the piece of cake that Marcus offered and prepared to listen to whatever question or request might be forthcoming. "I've been thinking about my friends from my old school, and I know some of them are really smart and hard-working, but they might not get the same opportunities I've had," Marcus continued. "Is there a way to nominate other students for scholarship consideration, or maybe to create mentoring programs that could help them prepare for these opportunities?" The question reflected Marcus's consistent pattern of thinking beyond his own circumstances, to consider how benefits could be extended to others facing similar challenges. David had observed this tendency in various contexts, from Marcus's sharing of lunch in the park, to his advocacy for expanded community garden programs, to his suggestions for making foundation events more burlesque, inclusive, and accessible. "That's an excellent question," David replied. "And actually, the foundation board has been discussing exactly that kind of expansion. We've learned so much from our partnership with your family that we're ready to develop a more comprehensive program that could support multiple students and families simultaneously." End quote. The conversation that followed outlined plans for a scholarship and mentoring network that would identify and support academically talented students from low-income families throughout the district. Marcus would play a central role in the program's design and implementation, drawing on his experiences as both a scholarship recipient and a young person who understood the challenges faced by his peers. Isabella listened to this exchange with a mixture of pride and amazement that had become familiar to her as she watched her son navigate opportunities that had been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. Marcus's ability to absorb new experiences while maintaining his core values and concern for others reflected not only his individual character, but also the effectiveness of the partnership approach that had made such growth possible. The evening concluded with a group photo that captured the diverse community that had formed around the original partnership between Marcus, Isabella, and David. Children from multiple schools and neighborhoods stood alongside parents, teachers, foundation staff members, and community leaders, all connected through various programs and initiatives that had grown from that initial shared meal in Maple Street Park. As David prepared to lead the celebration, Marcus approached him with a final observation that would influence David's thinking for months to come. "You know what I've realized?" Marcus said, his tone carrying the thoughtful quality that characterized his most significant insights. "That day when I shared my lunch with you, I thought I was helping someone who needed food. But I think maybe you needed something more important than food, and I needed to learn something more important than sharing." David paused in gathering his things, recognizing that Marcus was building toward a conclusion that would be worth hearing completely. "I think we both needed to remember that the most valuable things people can give each other aren't things at all," Marcus continued. "They're recognition, respect, and the chance to be part of something bigger than our individual problems or advantages." The insight was remarkably sophisticated for someone Marcus's age, but David had learned not to be surprised by the depth of the young man's understanding. Marcus had been shaped by experiences that required wisdom beyond his years, and he had been supported by relationships that encouraged rather than stifled his intellectual and emotional development. "I think you're exactly right," David replied, extending his hand for the firm handshake that had become their traditional farewell gesture. "And I think that understanding is going to serve you well as you continue growing and learning and finding new ways to make a difference in other people's lives." 2 years later, Marcus Chen stood once again at a podium addressing a large audience. But this time, the setting was the graduation ceremony for his 8th grade class at the private academy, where he had excelled academically while maintaining his involvement in community service and leadership activities. As the class valedictorian, Marcus had been invited to deliver the graduation address to his classmates, their families, and the school community. The speech he had prepared reflected not only his academic achievements, but also the broader lessons he had learned about community, responsibility, and the importance of using individual success to create opportunities for others. His words were carefully chosen to resonate with an audience that included both privileged families who had always expected such opportunities and scholarship students who understood the significance of educational access in ways that their wealthier peers were still learning to appreciate. "When I started at this school 2 years ago," Marcus began, "I was intimidated by everything that seemed different from my previous educational experience. The facilities were more impressive. The academic expectations were higher. And many of my classmates had backgrounds and experiences that were very different from mine." Isabella sat in the audience section reserved for families, wearing a dress that she had selected specifically for the occasion. Her health had remained stable under the medical care that the foundation partnership had made possible, and her work with nutrition education programs had expanded to include policy advocacy and curriculum development at the state level. David Wellington sat several rows behind Isabella, maintaining his preference for low visibility, while witnessing another milestone in Marcus's remarkable educational journey. The Foundation's scholarship program had grown to support nearly 50 students across multiple schools, with Marcus serving as both a mentor to younger participants and an advisor to the program's ongoing development. What I discovered, Marcus continued, is that the differences between students from various backgrounds are less important than the similarities in our desire to learn, grow, and make positive contributions to our communities. The real education I received here wasn't just about academic subjects, but about how to bridge differences and create partnerships that benefit everyone involved. The theme of partnership and mutual benefit had become central to Marcus's understanding of effective leadership and social responsibility. His involvement with the Foundation had provided him with opportunities to observe how successful collaborations were built and maintained, lessons that he had applied to student government, community service projects, and peer mentoring activities. Marcus's graduation speech concluded with a challenge to his classmates to use their educational advantages in service of broader community benefit, a message that reflected his own evolution from a boy who shared his lunch out of simple kindness to a young leader who understood the systemic dimensions of social inequality and community development. The applause that followed was enthusiastic and sustained, reflecting the audience's appreciation for words that challenged them to think beyond individual achievement toward collective responsibility. As Marcus returned to his seat among his classmates, he caught sight of David's approving nod and Isabella's proud smile, reminders of the partnership that had made this moment possible. After the ceremony, as families gathered for the traditional reception, Marcus found himself surrounded by classmates, teachers, and family friends who wanted to congratulate him on both his speech and his academic achievements. The conversations that followed covered topics ranging from his high school plans to his continued involvement with the Foundation's expanding programs. David approached through the crowd, carrying an envelope that contained Marcus's high school scholarship documentation, along with a personal letter that he had written to commemorate this educational milestone. The scholarship would cover Marcus's tuition, fees, and related expenses at whatever high school he chose to attend, whether public or private, local or boarding, traditional or innovative. "Congratulations, Marcus," David said, extending both the envelope and his hand for their customary handshake. "Your mother and I are incredibly proud of everything you've accomplished, not just academically, but in terms of the leadership and character you've demonstrated throughout this experience." Marcus accepted the envelope with gratitude while focusing on the more personal aspects of David's congratulations. The relationship between them had evolved from benefactor and recipient to something more complex and meaningful, resembling the bond between a mentor and protege, while maintaining the mutual respect that had characterized their interactions from the beginning. "Thank you for everything," Marcus replied, his words encompassing not only the immediate scholarship, but the entire partnership that had transformed his family's circumstances and opportunities. "I've been thinking about how to use high school to prepare for the kind of work I want to do in college and beyond, and I have some ideas I'd like to discuss with you and Mom." The conversation that followed outlined Marcus's emerging vision for his future education and career, plans that reflected his growing understanding of social entrepreneurship, community development, and the ways that business principles could be applied to address social problems. His goals were ambitious, but grounded in realistic assessments of the preparation and experience he would need to achieve them effectively. Isabella joined their conversation, contributing insights about Marcus's development that reflected her perspective as both his mother and his closest observer throughout the partnership experience. Her observations about his growing maturity, leadership skills, and commitment to community service provided valuable context for understanding how the scholarship program had achieved its intended goals. "What impresses me most," Isabella said, "is how Marcus has learned to accept opportunities without losing sight of his responsibility to create similar opportunities for others. That balance between personal achievement and social responsibility isn't easy to maintain, especially for someone his age." David nodded, recognizing the accuracy of Isabella's assessment, while also understanding the ways that Marcus's character development reflected not only individual growth, but also the effectiveness of the partnership model that had shaped his experiences. As the reception continued around them, with graduates and families celebrating achievements while discussing future plans, David reflected on the remarkable journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness in Maple Street Park. The boy who had offered his lunch to a stranger had grown into a young leader who understood that individual success was most meaningful when it contributed to broader community benefit. The partnership that had started as an effort to address one family's immediate needs had evolved into a model for community development that was being replicated across the country. Marcus's story had become a powerful example of what was possible when assistance was provided with respect for recipients' dignity, recognition of their existing strengths, and commitment to long-term partnership rather than short-term charity. Most importantly, the relationship between Marcus, Isabella, and David had demonstrated that authentic partnerships could bridge differences in background, resources, and life experience while creating mutual benefit that extended far beyond the original participants. The boy who had shared his sandwich had taught a billionaire about the true meaning of generosity, while the billionaire had provided resources that allowed the boy to develop his natural leadership abilities and community commitment. As Marcus Chen prepared to begin the next phase of his educational journey, he carried with him not only the knowledge and skills he had acquired through academic study, but also the deeper understanding of partnership, community, and social responsibility that had been nurtured through his relationship with David Wellington and the Foundation's expanding network of families and organizations. The story that had begun with a shared peanut butter sandwich had become a testament to the transformative power of authentic human connection, mutual respect, and the willingness to see potential rather than just problems in every person and community. Marcus's future achievements would build on this foundation, creating new opportunities for others while honoring the values and relationships that had made his own success possible. The end of Marcus's 8th grade experience marked not the conclusion of his partnership with the Wellington Foundation, but rather its evolution into new forms of collaboration and mutual support that would continue throughout his high school years, college education, and eventual career in social entrepreneurship and community development. The boy who had offered his lunch to a stranger had become a young man who understood that sharing was indeed richer than money, not because material resources were unimportant, but because the relationships and communities built through authentic generosity provided the foundation for sustainable prosperity that benefited everyone involved. As summer approached following Marcus's graduation, the Wellington Foundation announced an unprecedented expansion of its youth leadership program. Marcus would spend the summer months working as a junior consultant, collaborating with foundation staff to evaluate potential partnership opportunities in 3 different cities. This position represented far more than typical teenage employment. It was an apprenticeship in community development that would provide Marcus with professional experience while contributing meaningful value to the foundation's operations. The first city on Marcus's summer itinerary was Detroit, Michigan, where the foundation had been invited to explore partnerships with organizations serving families affected by economic transition and urban renewal. Marcus traveled to Detroit, accompanied by Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, who served as the foundation's director of community partnerships. Sarah had specifically requested Marcus's participation in the Detroit evaluation, believing that his perspective as a young person who had experienced economic uncertainty would provide insights that adult professionals might miss. Detroit's landscape told stories of both decline and renewal that Marcus found fascinating and sobering. Abandoned buildings stood alongside innovative urban farms, while new technology companies operated in renovated warehouses that had once housed automotive manufacturing. The city's complexity defied simple categorization as either success story or cautionary tale, requiring nuanced understanding of how economic change affected different communities in different ways. Marcus's first assignment involved interviewing teenagers who participated in various youth development programs throughout the city. These conversations took place in community centers, libraries, coffee shops, and parks, informal settings that encouraged honest dialogue about challenges, opportunities, and aspirations. The young people Marcus met shared experiences that resonated with his own, while also revealing circumstances and perspectives that expanded his understanding of urban poverty and resilience. One conversation particularly struck Marcus during his second day in Detroit. He met Aaliyah Johnson, a 15-year-old girl who had been caring for her younger siblings while their mother worked multiple jobs to support the family. Aaliyah's academic achievements were remarkable given her responsibilities, but she faced constant uncertainty about whether she would be able to continue her education beyond high school. "I love learning," Aaliyah told Marcus as they sat in a community garden similar to the one he had helped establish in his own neighborhood. "But sometimes I wonder if it's realistic to think about college when my family needs me to start working as soon as I'm old enough." Marcus recognized the familiar tension between individual aspirations and family obligations, a dynamic he had navigated throughout his own educational journey. However, Aaliyah's situation was complicated by factors that Marcus had not experienced, including housing instability and the absence of community support networks that could provide practical assistance during challenging periods. "What kind of work do you want to do eventually?" Marcus asked, focusing on Aaliyah's long-term goals rather than her immediate constraints. Aaliyah's face brightened as she described her interest in environmental science and her dream of developing GRAS, sustainable solutions to urban environmental problems. She had been conducting independent research on soil remediation techniques that could make abandoned lots suitable for community gardening, work that demonstrated both scientific aptitude and practical problem-solving skills. "I want to help neighborhoods like mine become healthier and more beautiful," she explained. "There's so much potential here, but people need resources and support to make positive changes happen." Marcus took detailed notes during his conversation with Aaliyah, recognizing qualities that reminded him of his own experiences, while also identifying ways that foundation partnerships could address systemic barriers that prevented talented young people from accessing appropriate educational opportunities. Aaliyah's combination of academic ability, community commitment, and practical leadership experience made her exactly the kind of person who could benefit from and contribute to expanded foundation programming. Over the following 3 days, Marcus interviewed 27 additional young people, each conversation revealing different aspects of how economic uncertainty affected educational aspirations and community engagement. He documented not only individual stories, but also patterns that emerged across multiple interviews, information that would inform foundation decision-making about potential partnership structures and program priorities. The second week of Marcus's Detroit experience involved shadowing various community organizations that were potential foundation partners. He observed board meetings, program implementation sessions, and strategic planning discussions, gaining firsthand understanding of how nonprofit organizations operated and the challenges they faced in sustaining effective programming with limited resources. One organization that particularly impressed Marcus was the Detroit Youth Leadership Collaborative, which operated an innovative program combining academic support with hands-on community development projects. Students who participated in the program received tutoring and college preparation assistance, while also working on real neighborhood improvement initiatives that provided practical experience in project management, public speaking, and collaborative problem-solving. Marcus spent an entire day working alongside participants in the Youth Leadership Collaborative's Urban Agriculture Project, helping to plant vegetables in a former vacant lot that had been transformed into a productive community space. The work was physically demanding, but intellectually stimulating, requiring careful attention to soil conditions, plant spacing, irrigation systems, and long-term maintenance planning. "This garden feeds about 40 families during the growing season," explained Jerome Washington, a 17-year-old who had been involved with the project for 2 years. "But more importantly, it teaches people that they can create positive change in their neighborhoods if they work together and stick with long-term plans." Jerome's insight resonated strongly with Marcus, who recognized similar themes in his own community's garden project, while also appreciating the ways that Detroit's specific circumstances required different approaches and solutions. The scale of Detroit's challenges was larger than what Marcus had encountered in his own neighborhood, but the fundamental principles of community engagement and collaborative problem-solving remained consistent. Marcus's final assignment in Detroit involved presenting his findings to a joint meeting of foundation staff and potential community partners. His presentation focused on the remarkable talent and determination he had observed among Detroit's young people, while also identifying specific ways that foundation partnerships could amplify existing community strengths rather than imposing external solutions. "The teenagers I met here aren't looking for charity," Marcus told the assembled group. "They're looking for opportunities to develop their skills, pursue their education, and contribute to positive change in their communities. The most effective partnerships will be ones that recognize and build on the leadership potential that already exists among Detroit's young people." His recommendations included expanded scholarship programs, mentorship networks connecting Detroit youth with professionals in their fields of interest, and funding for community-initiated projects that addressed local priorities identified by residents themselves. These suggestions reflected Marcus's growing understanding of how effective community development required balancing external resources with internal leadership and decision-making authority. The positive response to Marcus's Detroit presentation led to an invitation for him to participate in similar evaluations in Cleveland, Ohio, and Camden, New Jersey, during the remaining weeks of his Ikin Bowl. Summer internship. Each city presented unique circumstances and opportunities, providing Marcus with increasingly sophisticated understanding of how economic, social, and political factors influenced community crafts. Development outcomes. Cleveland's situation differed significantly from Detroit's. With a more diversified economy that had weathered industrial transition more successfully, while still facing significant challenges related to educational equity and neighborhood investment, Marcus's work in Cleveland focused on exploring partnerships with organizations that served immigrant and refugee families, populations that brought valuable skills and perspectives, while also facing barriers related to language, credential recognition, and cultural navigation. During his time in Cleveland, Marcus met families whose experiences reminded him of his mother's journey as an immigrant, while also revealing challenges and opportunities that reflected different historical periods and country of origin circumstances. He conducted interviews in Spanish, Vietnamese, and Arabic, languages he had been studying through his scholarship program, discovering that multilingual communication skills opened doors to conversations and insights that would otherwise have been inaccessible. One particularly meaningful encounter occurred during Marcus's visit to a community center that served Somali refugees who had been resettled in Cleveland over the previous decade. He met Amina Hassan, a woman in her 40s who had been a teacher in Somalia before coming to the United States, but was working as a house cleaner because her credentials were not recognized and she lacked resources to pursue recertification. "I have so much knowledge and experience that I want to share with young people," Amina told Marcus through a translator, her frustration evident despite the language barrier. "But the system here makes it very difficult for people like me to use our professional skills." Marcus recognized that Amina's situation represented both a personal tragedy and a community loss. Since her teaching expertise could benefit students who shared her linguistic and cultural background, while also enriching the broader educational environment, her circumstances illustrated how immigration policies and professional licensing requirements sometimes prevented communities from accessing valuable human resources that were readily available, but systematically underutilized. The conversation with Amina inspired Marcus to research credential recognition programs and alternative pathways for immigrant professionals to contribute their expertise while pursuing formal recertification. His findings became part of a comprehensive report that recommended foundation support for organizations developing innovative approaches to professional integration and cross-cultural mentorship. Marcus's final summer assignment took him to Camden, New Jersey, where he explored partnerships focused on criminal justice reform and community healing. Camden's recent history included both significant challenges related to crime and poverty and remarkable innovations in community policing and restorative justice that had begun transforming relationships between residents and institutions. The complexity of Camden's situation required Marcus to grapple with issues that extended beyond the educational and economic development focus of his previous community development work. He interviewed young people who had been affected by incarceration of family members, community leaders who were working to rebuild social trust, and police officers who were implementing new approaches to public safety that prioritized community engagement over enforcement alone. One conversation that profoundly influenced Marcus's thinking occurred during his meeting with Carlos Rodriguez, a 20-year-old who had spent 2 years in juvenile detention before being released to a community-based program that combined education, job training, and restorative justice practices. Carlos had not only completed his high school education, but was also working as a peer counselor, helping other young people avoid the mistakes that had led to his own incarceration. The difference between going back to jail and building a positive future isn't just about individual choices. Carlos explained to Marcus during their conversation in a community center that had been designed specifically to provide support for formerly incarcerated individuals. It's about whether you have people who believe in your potential and opportunities to prove that you're more than the worst thing you've ever done. Carlos's insight highlighted the importance of community support systems in creating pathways for personal transformation and social reintegration. His own success reflected not only individual determination, but also the effectiveness of programs that provided structure, resources, and meaningful opportunities for contribution and growth. Marcus spent considerable time during his Camden visit observing restorative justice circles, community mediation sessions, and collaborative problem-solving meetings that brought together residents, police officers, social workers, and formerly incarcerated individuals to address neighborhood concerns through dialogue and shared action rather than punishment and exclusion. These experiences challenged Marcus to think beyond the relatively straightforward community development work he had observed in his previous assignments, requiring him to consider how trauma, inequality, and systemic injustice affected individual and community development in ways that demanded more comprehensive and nuanced responses. His Camden report included recommendations for foundation partnerships that would support organizations working at the intersection of education, criminal justice reform, and community healing. The report emphasized the need for long-term commitment and flexibility in program design, since effective work in this area required building trust and relationships that develop slowly over time. When Marcus returned home at the end of August, he carried with him not only professional experience, an enhanced understanding of community development, but also a transformed perspective on his own circumstances and opportunities. The young people he had met during his summer travels had demonstrated resilience, creativity, and leadership that challenged any assumptions about the relationship between economic circumstances and personal potential. Isabella noticed immediate changes in her son's demeanor and conversation style when he returned from his summer internship. Marcus had always been thoughtful and articulate, but his experiences in Detroit, Cleveland, and Camden had given him a more sophisticated vocabulary for discussing social issues and a deeper appreciation for the complexity of effective community development work. How do you think this summer changed your thinking about what you want to do with your education and career? Isabella asked during one of their evening conversations on the apartment balcony that overlooked the neighborhood where Marcus had grown up. Marcus considered the question carefully, understanding that his mother was asking not only about practical career planning, but also about how his expanding experiences were shaping his fundamental values and priorities. I think I understand better now that individual success and community development aren't separate goals, he replied. The most effective leaders I met this summer were people who had used their own experiences with challenges to help create opportunities for others facing similar situations. This insight reflected Marcus's growing understanding of leadership as service rather than personal advancement, a perspective that had been reinforced by his observations of effective community organizers, nonprofit directors, and young people who had transformed their own difficult circumstances into platforms for helping others. David Wellington was equally impressed by the maturity and sophistication that Marcus demonstrated when he presented his summer findings to the Foundation's Board of Directors in early September. The presentation lasted nearly 90 minutes and included detailed recommendations for partnership development, program design, and evaluation metrics that reflected professional-level analysis and strategic thinking. Marcus's work this summer has provided us with insights that would have taken our adult staff members much longer to develop, David told the board members following Marcus's presentation. His ability to connect with young people in different cities and his understanding of how community development principles apply across different contexts has been invaluable. The board's response to Marcus's work included approval for expanded youth leadership programming that would create opportunities for other teenagers to participate in similar community development internships. Marcus would play a central role in designing and mentoring this expanded program, responsibilities that represented a significant evolution in his relationship with the foundation. As Marcus began his freshman year at Metropolitan Academy, the prestigious private high school where his scholarship had secured enrollment, he carried with him not only academic preparation, but also practical experience in community development work that distinguished him from most of his new classmates. Metropolitan Academy's student body included young people from wealthy families alongside scholarship recipients like Marcus, creating an environment that required navigating social dynamics while maintaining focus on educational goals. Marcus's first semester courses included advanced mathematics, honors English literature, laboratory biology, world history, and introductory economics, a combination that challenged him academically while also providing foundation knowledge for his growing interest in social entrepreneurship and community development. His teachers quickly recognized his unique combination of intellectual ability and practical experience, often calling on him to contribute perspectives that connected classroom learning with real-world applications. The economics course proved particularly engaging for Marcus, since it provided theoretical frameworks for understanding many of the community development challenges he had observed during his summer internship. His teacher, Dr. Patricia Williams, had extensive experience in both academic economics and public policy analysis, creating classroom discussions that explored connections between economic theory and practical problem-solving. Marcus, you've mentioned several times that you've worked with communities facing economic transitions, Dr. Williams said during a class discussion about unemployment and workforce development. Can you share some specific examples of how communities have addressed these challenges? Marcus's response drew on his observations from Detroit, Cleveland, and Camden, providing concrete examples of how different cities had approached economic diversification, job training programs, and small business development. His classmates listened with obvious interest to stories that made abstract economic concepts feel immediate and relevant. These classroom contributions established Marcus as a valuable resource for his peers, while also creating opportunities for him to articulate and refine his own understanding of complex social and economic issues. His teachers began recommending additional readings and research opportunities that would deepen his knowledge in areas related to his demonstrated interests and experience. Outside the classroom, Marcus became involved with Metropolitan Academy's Community Service Council, a student organization that coordinated volunteer activities and service learning projects. However, rather than simply participating in existing programs, Marcus proposed that the council develop partnerships with community organizations that could benefit from sustained student engagement rather than sporadic volunteer visits. His proposal led to the creation of a new program called Community Partnerships for Learning, which connected Metropolitan Academy students with local organizations for semester-long projects that provided meaningful assistance while also creating educational opportunities for the students involved. Marcus served as the program's first student coordinator, responsibilities that required him to communicate with community organizations, recruit and train student participants, and evaluate project outcomes. The success of the Community Partnerships for Learning program attracted attention from other private schools in the area, leading to invitations for Marcus to speak at conferences and workshops about effective approaches to student community engagement. These speaking opportunities provided Marcus with additional platforms for sharing his perspectives on community development, while also connecting him with educators and community leaders who shared similar interests and values. One particularly significant speaking engagement occurred in November when Marcus was invited to address the annual conference of the Regional Association of Independent Schools. His presentation focused on the mutual benefits that resulted when schools developed authentic partnerships with community organizations, rather than treating service learning as a one-way charitable activity. When students approach community service as an opportunity to learn from and with community members, rather than just helping them, everyone involved benefits more, Marcus told the audience of educators and administrators. Community organizations get sustained support for their work, while students develop deeper understanding of social issues and more authentic relationships with people from different backgrounds. Marcus's presentation included specific examples from the Community Partnerships for Learning program, demonstrating how high school students had contributed meaningful value to community organizations, while also developing skills and perspectives that enhanced their academic learning and personal development. The positive response to Marcus's conference presentation led to consulting opportunities that allowed him to help other schools develop similar programs. This work provided Marcus with additional income that he used to support his mother's continued medical care, while also contributing to a college savings account that would supplement his scholarship funding. By the spring of his freshman year, Marcus had established himself as a student leader whose influence extended far beyond Metropolitan Academy's campus. His work with the Wellington Foundation continued to evolve, incorporating new responsibilities that included mentoring younger scholarship recipients and contributing to strategic planning for the foundation's expanding programs. One of Marcus's most rewarding new responsibilities involved working with Aaliyah Johnson, the Detroit teenager he had met during his summer internship. The foundation had approved a comprehensive partnership with Aaliyah's family that included scholarship support for her high school and college education, along with assistance for her mother's job training and the ISE, Family's Housing Stabilization. Aaliyah visited Marcus's city for a week-long orientation to the foundation's scholarship program, staying with Marcus and Isabella in their apartment and participating in various activities designed to help her understand the opportunities and expectations associated with her new educational pathway. "I can't believe how much has changed since we talked in the garden last summer," Aaliyah told Marcus during a visit to the community center where many foundation programs were based. "6 months ago, I was worried about whether I'd be able to finish high school, and now I'm planning for college and thinking about graduate school." Marcus smiled, recognizing in Aaliyah's amazement the same sense of expanded possibilities that he had experienced when his own partnership with the foundation began. However, he also understood that the transition from economic uncertainty to educational opportunity required ongoing support and adjustment, lessons he had learned through his own experience and observation of other scholarship recipients. "The opportunities are incredible," Marcus agreed. "But the most important thing is staying connected to the values and goals that made you a strong candidate for the scholarship in the first place. The foundation supports people who want to use their education to make positive differences in their communities, not people who just want to escape from their backgrounds." End quote. This conversation reflected Marcus's developing philosophy about the relationship between individual achievement and social responsibility, perspectives that had been shaped by his experiences with community development work and his observations of effective leaders in various contexts. As his freshman year concluded, Marcus had achieved academic excellence while also expanding his leadership roles and community involvement in ways that demonstrated remarkable maturity and strategic thinking. His grades placed him at the top of his class, while his extracurricular activities had created positive changes that extended far beyond his school environment. Most importantly, Marcus had maintained the authentic concern for others and commitment to community benefit that had characterized his decision to share his lunch with a stranger in Maple Street Park 3 years earlier. The boy who had demonstrated simple kindness had grown into a young leader who understood that effective change required combining compassion with strategic thinking, individual achievement with collective benefit, and local action with broader systemic awareness. The foundation's partnership with Marcus and his family had evolved from emergency assistance to collaborative leadership development, creating a model that was being replicated with dozens of other families, while also influencing policy discussions about education, community development, and social mobility at state and national levels. As Marcus prepared for his sophomore year at Metropolitan Academy, he looked forward to continued academic challenges while also anticipating expanded opportunities to contribute to community development work and foundation programming. The teenager who had once worried about having enough lunch to share had become a young leader whose influence was already extending to communities across the country, demonstrating that authentic generosity could indeed be richer than money when it was combined with education, opportunity, and sustained commitment to serving others.